Hello and welcome back to Comeback Sports. This is who makes the college football playoff. Now listen, this has been one of the bigger topics this week. Is trending all over Twitter, all the talking heads out there on all the networks, they're all talking about it. Who makes the college football playoff? There's been a lot of controversy over the recent rankings by the College Football Playoff Committee, and for honestly good reason. There's a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity on what goes into making this rankings, what goes on in that decision making process. And first of all, I want to make it clear that this kind of presentation is not my personal opinion. I've tried to take my personal opinion on who I think should be in, who I think should be out. I'm trying to disregard that. As you see here, the bottom line is using the committee's logic. What this is trying to use the committee's past decisions of who made the playoff, whether it's 4-team era or last season. It's kind of combining that logic into how it can be presented for this year's playoff. Now, this doesn't mean that the committee will follow what I say. This is just trying to make an estimate on, number one, what the committee values and how they implement their values. I think that's actually kind of the most important part. One more thing to mention here is that I want this to be almost kind of Supreme Court logic, how the United States Supreme Court sometimes sets precedents with their decisions. That's kind of what the College Football Playoff Committee does as well with their rulings. So, for example, a precedent would be without your quarterback, you're not playoff eligible. Now, of course, the committee could decide against it, but the precedent set with prior rulings would go against that. So just keep this in mind. This is all about using those precedents to determine this year's field. And again, the committee is not bound to this at all. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what logic they're using. This is just kind of going back through the years, piecing something together for this year. So without further ado, let's get into who makes the college football playoff using the committee's logic. So we're going to start off with teams that are in without a doubt. For me, I think Ohio State and Indiana are in 12-0, and they're both in the Big Ten title game. There's nothing that could keep those two teams out of the playoff. There's just nothing that could stand in their way. Then I have Georgia. They're 11-1 in the SEC title game. Nothing's going to take them out either. Alabama, they're 10-2. However, they are in the SEC title game, and I think that alone will keep them in the playoff. And the committee in this 12-team era seems to be much more lenient with conference championship losses, like last year with SMU. That's going to get brought up a lot. So I think with that reason, Alabama 100% in the college football playoff. Then you have Texas A&M, 11-1 again. Their one loss is to Texas, who at the moment ranked number 13th in the country in the recent rankings over Vanderbilt and Utah, two 10-2 teams. And we will get into that a little bit later on. But Texas A&M, again, 11-1. They are within the field 100%. Same logic with Oregon, 11-1 in the two best conferences out there. So that's six teams, 3 from the Big Ten, 3 from the SEC. Then you have Oklahoma, a 4th team from the SEC. They have a win over Alabama, and the committee seems to value head-to-head when teams have equal record. I think that alone will keep Oklahoma in, and their 2 losses are to Texas and Ole Miss, who again are top 13 teams. So Oklahoma has some good losses. They have some good wins. They have that non-conference victory over Michigan, which I think that's a big reason that they are kind of viewed as highly as they are. They also have, again, the win over Alabama. Absolutely huge for them. I think they're 100% a lock. And then you have Texas Tech. They're recently ranked 4th in the country in the college football playoff rankings. They're 11-1, and again, they're in the Big 12 title game. And again, the committee, much more lenient with conference championship losses. So I think Texas Tech is safe. They also had that close loss to Arizona State. So I think they are in. They also had that big win over BYU and Utah, who are, by the rankings, the two best teams other than themselves in the Big 12. So then, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. I believe, let's see, it's 8 teams. 8 teams in the field. And there can only be 12. So here in this conference champion thing, you have two more at-large, or not at-large, but 2 more conference championship bids. BYU is a team that could win the Big 12, which would put them in as one of the 5. But we'll get more with BYU later. But they're 100% in with the win. They take the Big 12 bid. Texas Tech, in my opinion, in accordance with all of this, the committee seems like Texas Tech is a lock, even if BYU wins this weekend. But then you have the American Conference. They get in either way, both Tulane and North Texas ranked in the top 25. I think North Texas, just speaking personally, I think they're a very, very underrated team. I think it took way too long for them to get ranked. I think they're a top 20 team. They have an amazing offense, amazing quarterback. Tulane also good themselves. Winner of American is 100% in. UVA in the ACC is also in with a win over Duke. But a Duke win, and JMU could sneak into the playoff. They came in, I think they're ranked 24th or 25th. I think it's 25th in the country in the CFP rankings. So JMU, if they win the Sun Belt, Duke wins the ACC title game. Again, it's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. It doesn't mean that all the Power 4 conferences get a bid. So if UVA were to lose, Duke now would be 8-5 with that win. You could see JMU, maybe even UNLV, out of the Mountain West. JMU would have to lose their championship game, which anything's possible. It's a crazy sport. But that's how the conference champions line up. So going here, we got 8 teams. BYU could be a 9th if they win the Big 12. That would be 9 locks. Then you have 2 more. But we're going to assume that Texas Tech wins just for the sake of this. So that's 10 teams that are locked in. So there's 2 spots left open. And here are the bubble teams. And this isn't in any particular order. This is just listing them out. So you have Ole Miss, who's 11-1, Vanderbilt, who's 10-2, Miami, 10-2, Notre Dame, 10-2, Utah, 10-2, Texas, 9-3, and BYU at 11-1. So we're going to go and break down some of the reasons that each team should be in and out as well. You got to take that into consideration as well. So we're going to start with Ole Miss. So obviously the elephant in the room is Lane Kiffin leaves Ole Miss. It is a huge loss for them simply because, it's your leader. But then you go to a precedent that was set in 2023, part of the college football playoff selection criteria. This is the last one listed. It's listed on their homepage. You can go look it up. It's right there for the world to see. Other relevant factors such as unavailability of key players and coaches that may have affected a team's performance during the season or likely will affect its postseason performance. And again, that's directly from the CFP committee. It's right on the homepage in their selection criteria. This was also the reasoning that Florida State was left out of the 2023 college football playoff, and it could come up again this year. And then, again, going back to that FSU undefeated conference champion, and they're left out over teams with a loss. So this ruling set the precedent that unavailability of players and coaches is a factor over wins and losses. So wins and losses, I will say this, the committee has been pretty consistent with their rulings. As much as people like to hate on them, they've been pretty consistent with kind of how things fall in line. Record seems to precede all things, except for this. This is the exception. So you may be asking why Ole Miss would be on the bubble at 11-1. It's because of that reason. Again, this precedes record. It holds precedent over it. And that comes from the College Football Playoff Committee itself. Now then you get into the argument, well, that was a 14 field. Florida State went down one spot and they just happened to miss the playoff. And again, that's true as well, but then you have to put that into account here. There's also other teams that are deserving of this playoff field. And again, the reason I waited so long to make this video is that Oklahoma, we found out, will be getting their offensive coordinator back, Charlie Weiss. But again, you're losing your head guy. You're losing the guy over the program. And that's 100% going to affect postseason performance, and you're a fool if you don't think it will. Now, again, that's not saying that Ole Miss is suddenly going to be a team that doesn't know how to play football. I'm not saying that at all. But it likely will affect their postseason performance. It says that right here in the criteria. And again, Lane Kiffin, he wasn't just the head coach. He's also the play caller. That's something else. That's something that will affect Ole Miss. And it very well could make them better. But you don't know that. And so I think that if that conversation comes up, that's the only reason that Ole Miss is on the bubble. So then reasons to be left in. Ole Miss, again, they have the number 7 strength of record in the nation. Big win over Oklahoma. Again, head-to-head matters. And Ole Miss has that record. And then the committee has yet to make a decision with the unavailability of coach or player mixed with head-to-head results. What I mean by this is it very well could have been different if Florida State, going back to that 2023 ruling, could have been different if they would have had a win over Michigan, Washington, Texas, or Alabama. And the committee hasn't really had to make a decision where, okay, the team doesn't have a player or coach available. It's going to change the way they play, but they also beat a team in the playoff. So that's something that will come in as a factor as well. So that means the previous precedent could not mean as much since Ole Miss has a win over a team that's almost, I would say, 100% a lock for the playoff. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And again, Ole Miss, excellent season. They have every right to make the college football playoff. Again, we're just listing out reasons as to what the committee might be thinking at this point in time. So then you also have on the bubble BYU at 11-1. So some of the reasons that BYU should be in is they have a strong case, one of the best strength of records in the country, number 6, and that's the best of all the teams on the bubble in strength of record. I think they're 35th in strength of schedule, which is also one of the best on the bubble. And then going into last year's precedent with 11-1 SMU, they wound up losing the ACC title game to Clemson. And we see again, there's this precedent that conference title contenders are given a little leeway on championship weekend. But again, that could be different. So reasons to be left out. BYU, they'd be the first team to lose to a college football playoff team twice during the season. Now, for those of you who don't know, BYU's one loss comes to Texas Tech, who they play this weekend in the Big 12 title game. So if BYU loses to them, sure, they're 11-2. They have a really good record. They lost the conference championship game, which a lot of these teams on the bubble didn't get to. But they lost to the same team twice. I think that's a pretty big thing for one reason, because that could signal to the committee, okay, you might not be ready for the playoff if you lose to the same team twice, and you don't have a win over any other team on the bubble except for Utah. And Utah, they're right there on the back of the bubble. They're in here with a very outside chance. But again, BYU, that means 2 losses to Texas Tech. I don't know how the committee would value that, because we haven't seen it before. 2 losses to the same team. And I think that could hurt BYU more if they just lost the game to someone else. And again, going to that, I want to go to the precedent with SMU last year. SMU was competing against 9-3 teams, which is a little bit different. Now you've got a few 10-2 teams on the bubble. So that means that there's just so many good teams that a loss this weekend could really do it in for BYU. Not only, just losing to Texas Tech twice, but if it was a loss in general, it would make it really hard just because there's so many good teams left in this field. So then we have Notre Dame at 10-2. Some reasons to be in Notre Dame. They've looked like one of the best teams in the country, without a doubt. They've really steamrolled everybody in their path for the past 10 weeks. 10-game win streak. Coach Freeman has his squad looking amazing. They look really good. Jeremiah Love, he's the best running back in the country. Absolutely prime time. It'd be a travesty not to be able to watch him play in the playoff again. Last year against Penn State had the single greatest run I've ever seen. I know people listening, they know what I'm talking about. But again, Notre Dame, they're 10-2, and again, they've looked like one of the at least top 10 teams in the country, if not higher, in the past 10 weeks. They've just really been hitting their stride as a group. But then you get the reasons to be left out. Notre Dame, they lost to Miami and Texas A&M this year. And they've only played the 42nd toughest schedule. Notre Dame, they don't really have a marquee win. Their biggest win is 10 points over USC. And they do have a ranked win over Pitt. But I don't think Pitt ever really deserved to be ranked. And that's kind of coming in as it's not really a fact. The committee did rank Pitt in the top 25. I don't think Pitt was ever that good of a team. And I think the eye test does matter a bit, especially with the opponents you beat. I think it matters more for the opponents you beat than the way you look. Because, Notre Dame, they have beat some decent teams this year. But, USC's good, it's a good win for Notre Dame, but you don't really have anything other than that. I don't think the committee will look at that Pitt win as, oh, they beat a top 25 team. They're going to say, oh, they beat Pitt. A solid ACC team. At best, a solid ACC team. Then you have Miami. So some reasons that Miami should be in. They've had a difficult non-conference win over Notre Dame. That's really the big thing that's kind of keeping their hopes alive on the bubble. And they've looked like the best ACC team. I know they're not playing in the conference championship game due to tiebreakers and all that. The ACC, absolutely, like the Wild West this year, is absolutely ridiculous. But Miami, they've looked like one of the best teams, and they really have a talented roster. And again, I know the committee not necessarily judging on talent, but Miami, they've beat a lot of good teams, and they have a lot of common opponents with Notre Dame that they beat worse. Now, of course, Miami did try to run it up in some of those situations, scoring in the fourth quarter. But again, the committee might overlook some of that. And again, in the committee criteria, they do look at common opponents. So that's a big thing, I think, between the Miami and Notre Dame debate. But now switching gears, Miami, very good team, some good wins. They have that big win over Notre Dame. But some reasons to be out. Miami, they got 2 bad losses to Louisville and SMU, who are solid ACC teams. And Miami only has the 44th ranked strength of schedule. That's pretty weak, especially compared to BYU and Ole Miss, and we'll get to Vanderbilt in a second, who also has a better strength of schedule than Miami does. And I want to say this, we're kind of finding out that losses matter more in a sense than wins do, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I want to say, for me personally, I think record matters, and I think the committee values that too. Of course, when you have the same record, that's when your losses and your wins get looked at a little bit more closely, but the committee has been pretty consistent about that. I alluded to that earlier. And those two losses look really just bad for Miami. Louisville, they struggle with a little bit of injury this year. I think they're a better team than their record suggests. And SMU just a little inconsistent. So I don't think the committee values those teams in very high regard. Neither one playing for a conference championship. They're going to be kind of just teams that make a bowl. I mean, SMU, they've been ranked in the top 25. I think the past 2 weeks before this recent ranking, they fell out with their loss to Cal. I don't think the committee will value those two losses. I think those really stain Miami's otherwise really solid resume, especially, again, with that win over Notre Dame. That's why you schedule a tough non-conference, is because it still has you in a discussion like this. But then you have the next team, Vanderbilt at 10-2. Some of the reasons for them to be in: 22nd strength of schedule, the 11th strength of record, which they're some of the best numbers in this 17 bubble. Vanderbilt, they've lost to two ranked teams, being Alabama and Texas, who are now two of the top 13 teams in the country. And again, the committee time and time again has ruled in favor of strength of schedule. It's kind of an important criteria, especially, again, when you have the same record. I think record has shown to be that number one priority. Then you get into the head-to-head strength of schedule debates. So I think that coming into play here will really benefit Vanderbilt in this spot. But then you have some reasons to be out. Vanderbilt's best win is Missouri and Tennessee, and they're two teams that are no longer ranked. And without that big marquee win, it's hard to justify Vanderbilt over a team kind of like Miami, who at least has that big win. Even though Vanderbilt, I think that Tennessee game was a phenomenal game for them, and I think the committee sees that as well. But then you have Texas jump them in the latest rankings. It's weird. I'm not sure what to make of the rankings. Quick tangent at the moment. The rankings are really weird because the committee came out and said, we're kind of gonna go for scratch when we really have to decide this thing. So I don't know how seriously to take the rankings. Last year they were pretty important, but last year was kind of a self-explanatory, everything kind of fell into place. This year, I mean, you have so many teams that could realistically be in this tournament. So again, not really sure where to value the college football playoff rankings coming into this final week, because the committee said it's not, a set in stone thing. It's going to change when the playoff field gets finalized. And they said that teams who don't play this weekend can move around. So you have to think they're going to look at it and kind of build this playoff from scratch. So I think ranking as of the moment is just a number. It's not really an end-all be-all thing. But then again, Vanderbilt, their best win, Missouri, Tennessee, they're two really good teams, but they're not ranked anymore. So without those, big wins, it's almost hard to justify Vanderbilt being in. Even though they have two good losses, they don't have those big wins. And then on the bubble as well, threw Utah in, because they do have a pretty solid resume. They cleaned house in the Big 12, and they're a Big 10-2 season. They don't really have a good strength of schedule, which we'll get in here, 57th in the country. And again, that's kind of a big criteria to the committee, especially when you're in there with a bunch of other 10-2 teams. In Utah, they've lost to the two best opponents they've played, BYU and Texas Tech. Again, two good losses, and they've had some solid wins. They just don't have anything that necessarily jumps off the page. I think if they had a ranked non-conference win, that might be able to push them over the hump over some other teams. But they don't really have that. So Utah, I think, kind of on the outside looking in, but they have really had a good season. Other than those two games against the two best opponents on their schedule, they just couldn't get it done. And at the end of the day, you're going for wins. Then I threw Texas here on the bubble as well. There's a big push to get Texas in the playoff, and honestly for good reason. Texas, they beat 3 of the top 15 teams, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt, and no one has that many top 15 wins. But then you get into the thing we've been saying. Texas has 3 losses, and last year pointed out they had 9-3 schools left out of the playoff. You had Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina. They were all 9-3. They got left out in favor of a ACC title game, 11-2 loser SMU. So I think, again, the committee is kind of showing that record matters. Texas, I still have them on the bubble because they really do have a good resume, but again, they also have that abysmal loss to Florida. And they have close wins in overtime against Kentucky and Mississippi State, 2 teams that are not very good. Although Mississippi State has given some teams some trouble this season. They're a little bit of a tricky team. But again, Texas that Florida loss is really holding them back. And, people want to talk about that Ohio State game. And it's an understandable thing for Texas fans to be upset about because, they're like, oh, if we just scheduled a bad team and beat them, we're likely in. And you can see it. But it's because of those wins that would offset a loss to Florida. And honestly, they got blown out by Georgia. And the committee saw that game against Georgia. Even though it was close for like 3 quarters, it was never close. I'm using air quotes when I say close because it was a game that Georgia controlled the feeling of. They controlled the momentum the whole game. And even when Texas had it quote unquote close, it was never that close. Georgia had that game pretty much the whole time. And that's what it felt like. And again, I think that's the thing that the committee sees as well. And, they only lost to Ohio State by 7. Which, again, it's a good loss, but you have that Florida loss. It's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. If they beat that Florida team, they're in the playoff. If they beat Ohio State, they're in the playoff. If they beat Georgia, I think they're in the playoff. But it's just, you lose all 3 of those. And I think that's what really has hurt Texas. So now it comes down to it. Who makes the cut? And where can we look to see why? And I think it's very important to look at the why in this situation. And I'll explain it with my findings. So here are my rankings of the bubble teams based on historic rulings. I have Ole Miss as the first team in, BYU the second team in, Vanderbilt the first out, Miami the second out, Notre Dame the third out, Utah the fourth out, and Texas the fifth out. Or I guess more Texas first. I guess you go backwards when you're talking about out. I don't think Texas comes that close to making it. But it seems like, starting with Ole Miss, it seems like the conversation about Lane Kiffin's departure has yet to rear its head. And I don't know if it's going to gain traction in the room. I don't know if they're seriously going to be looking at that. I have a feeling they will. But that unsurety has me saying that I don't think they're going to factor that in as much as one would think, especially with the 2023 ruling. if you go just based off that, there's a good argument you can make that Ole Miss misses the playoff. But it seems like the conversation doesn't have that much steam behind it, so I have Ole Miss making it. Then, my last team in the field is BYU. BYU has a strong strength of record, and based off SMU's final at-large spot last year, it seems like this is how the committee will rule again this year. Again, that's just how it seems. It seems consistent. You don't punish teams who make the conference championship game. And BYU, 35th strength of schedule, that's not half bad for a team on the bubble. Ole Miss has a better strength of record, and Vanderbilt has a better strength of record than that, or a strength of schedule, sorry. So Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, and Texas are the only teams who have a better strength of schedule than BYU on the bubble, and nobody on the bubble has a better strength of record. So BYU, I think, because of that precedent set with SMU last year, I think they make the playoff. And then you have, I guess, the last team out, the team that's right there with BYU, and I think it's Vanderbilt. They have a strong strength of schedule, strong strength of record, and their 2 losses come to 2 top 15 teams. And again, they're an SEC team with 2 wins over really good SEC competition in Missouri and Tennessee. That Tennessee game, Vanderbilt dominated them in that second half. It wasn't really close. And I think the committee, when they look at that, if Vanderbilt makes it, it's that Tennessee win that puts them in. And then you get to Miami. I think they're a team, I don't think they have as good of a resume as Vanderbilt. I really don't. They've lost twice to solid opponents, Louisville and SMU. It's not the same caliber of loss as Alabama and Texas are. And with Miami's talent, they kind of underachieved. And therefore, I think those 2 losses come back to bite them. And I would hate it for Miami because I think they're a team, they can compete with anybody on any given weekend. They don't, to me, besides the Notre Dame win, they just don't have a win after that. I mean, their best win besides Notre Dame is Pitt. And I just don't think that's good enough to justify them over Vanderbilt, BYU, or Ole Miss. And it's barely enough to justify them over Notre Dame. However, Notre Dame lost to Miami, and they lost to Texas A&M. Those are 2 great losses. So you lose to 2 top 15 teams. But the committee has already established in the past that head-to-head takes precedent when teams share the same record. Therefore, Notre Dame can't make the playoff field without Miami making it. And to me, I don't think Miami is a team that has earned that spot in the field with their resume. So because of that, Notre Dame gets left out. And then we move on to Utah. Utah, they don't have the strength of schedule. They lack that flash to propel them over other teams. I just don't think when you compare resumes, Utah they don't have it. I could see them having a better resume than Miami in a strange way. I think Utah's beat a lot of teams that are better than some of the ACC competition that Miami played. I really do. Miami also didn't play a lot of the top teams in the ACC. They didn't play UVA, didn't play Georgia Tech, and I don't think Miami played Duke. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think they played Duke. So to me, I could see a world where Utah makes it over Miami. I don't think the committee really sees Utah as that valuable as a team. Although they have really reigned through the Big 12. They look good besides their games against BYU and Texas Tech. And then you get to Texas again. As I explained, they got 3 losses. And again, the committee, time and time again, record is the baseline judgment. And even though they have that head-to-head over Vanderbilt, they have the head-to-head over Oklahoma, and they have the head-to-head over Texas A&M, they don't have the same record. And again, if Texas is 10-2 with those head-to-heads, they're in without a shadow of a doubt. But they don't have the same record, and that's what has Texas out. So that's kind of the ranking. I think Ole Miss and BYU make the cut. Vanderbilt, Miami, Notre Dame, Utah, and Texas go on to play bowl games, which is unfortunate for them because honestly, I could see Vanderbilt winning a game. I could see Miami and Notre Dame winning a game. I could see Utah winning a game and Texas as well. Texas, again, they've looked really good, and I'm not going to sit here and say they're a bad team because they're kind of hitting their stride at the moment, it seems. They just beat Texas A&M, huge upset, but they just don't have the record. So it is really a shame that this many teams have to miss it because it would be an absolute joy to see Diego Pavia play in the college football playoff. It'd be a joy to see Carson Beck and his weapons, Malachi Toney in the playoff. It'd be a shame not to see Jeremiah Love, and it'd be a shame not to see anybody from Ole Miss, after, Lane Kiffin's departure. It'd be a shame not to see BYU and, Bear Bachmeier get their crack at things. And it really is sad that so many teams have to be out, but that's kind of the reality. And I don't want to say the answer is expanding to 16. I don't think that's the answer. It's not always as simple as just add more teams into the playoff, because you also don't know if this is an outlier year where there's just a lot of teams who won a lot of games, or is this the new standard? We're gonna see this over and over again each season. We're gonna see 15 teams with 10-2 record and 10-2 and above records. I don't know. I don't have that answer. So it's going to be interesting to see what the committee does for this. And I just want to say I don't envy a single person in that room. I think they have an impossible decision because every single team on this bubble is going to be upset that they don't get in. And honestly, rightfully so. There's so many teams with good cases. You understand why Ole Miss, BYU, Vanderbilt, Miami, Notre Dame, Utah, and Texas should have a shot. They're all really good teams, but they can't all make it. And again, it's a shame, but they can't. And the committee knows it. And they have a hard task. They're going to get hated by a majority of people, and they're only going to get loved by a few. So, really, honestly, I do feel bad for them. It's a tough decision, and, I've tried to break it down as best as I can without injecting myself too much in it. I mean, I gave my opinions on some of the things and, maybe some of the more subjective things that the committee will look at. And I want to talk about this real quick. I want to talk about what the committee values and kind of like the chain of command, it seems. So record's kind of the baseline. It's number 2 because the only thing so far that has trumped record is unavailability of key player and coach. And then when you get one step below record, it's conference championship. That's kind of a baseline thing. And also competing for that conference championship. As you see, conference championship appearance. Then it seems to go head-to-head. Again, it's kind of on that same level as record. Record, if you're having above record, conference championship, it doesn't matter as much. Still matters, but then when you get below that, that's when it gets head-to-head. That's when you're looking, okay, we got the same record. Who beat who? Oh, this team beat this team. They've got to be in because they won head-to-head. They proved it on the field. That's something quantifiable. That's the only thing quantifiable is head-to-head results and record. And I think that's why the committee values those things. Then you have strength of schedule, strength of record. When you don't have head-to-head, it kind of goes to that when comparing resumes. Then you have common opponents. I think that's like the last thing they look. That's kind of the last ditch effort. Is like, gosh, we got to look at something to determine. I'm not exactly sure where to add, quality losses, quality wins. I think that'd be honestly probably right below head-to-head. You look more at wins and losses, your big wins, and who did you lose to. That probably factors in somewhere in between head-to-head and strength of schedule. I mean, you could kind of say those are the same things. But yeah, again, it's not an official thing. The committee hasn't come out and say this is kind of the chain we're looking at. But it's kind of what the rulings and their selections have kind of said about them. But I think that the field will include Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, and BYU. And then, of course, the final two conference champions, whoever they may be. I think there's going to be a lot of good football. And I think there is ways to improve this process, but this is not what that's about. This is about using those past rulings, the past precedents to judge this year. And I think I've done that to the best of my ability. So thank you all for watching. If you like more of this content, like and subscribe. If you have any other comments, concerns, questions, anything else you'd like me to look into, put it down in the comment section below. Or if I missed anything, because that is possible. I am human at the end of the day. But again, thank you all for watching. And this has been Comeback Sports. See you next time.